Good day to all of you. I consider it a privilege to be able to talk to all of you using this online platform. I would like to focus on a very specific but nonetheless very important area of media and information literacy, which is news literacy. I think it should be fairly obvious to anyone with a mobile phone, with a smartphone, and social media account how news literacy should be considered a 21st century skill that our students must have. Now, why is this important? News is one of the types of information that's inescapable. We are all bound to consume it at some point and at regular intervals. It's a habit for some, reading the morning newspaper, watching the nightly news, or scrolling down our social media feeds. Information packaged as news acquires a halo effect, and we use it to decide on many things, economically and politically. It shapes or reinforces our worldviews. It triggers and inspires us. Now, it becomes a problem for our democratic society when misinformation comes into the picture. For instance, when a social media post or website claims that the Pope has endorsed a political candidate, or that a candidate has withdrawn from the race to endorse a rival, this has clear implications on voting and our democratic institutions, our democratic way of life. Now, we tend to think that we know about news because of how commonplace it is. But do we really? And many journalists take umbrage or take offense when they are accused of sloppiness or bias. I think the news media have to do a better job of explaining how news is produced, how journalism operates, and how editorial judgments or decisions are made. It will be easier if some essential concepts are taught progressively, beginning at the level of basic education. Stony Brook University in New York has one of the most prominent and international news literacy programs, more than a decade old, and it defines news literacy as the ability to use critical thinking skills to judge the reliability and credibility of news reports, whether they come via print, television, the internet, or social media. To apply the definition to the Filipin context, I would like to add radio, and even the Polish context. Now, the U.S. Radio, Television, Digital News Association offers another definition. It says that news literacy is the acquisition of 21st century critical thinking skills for analyzing and judging the reliability of news and information, differentiating among facts, opinions, and assertions in the media we consume, create, and distribute. Now, how different is it from the concepts of literacy or media and information literacy? Of course, news literacy is a narrower concept, but it delves into the inner workings of journalism and the production of news. Given the limited time, my objective for now is to outline some basic principles that should embody news literacy. First, it is imperative to know what journalism is and, most importantly, its limitations. This has been taken for granted, including by journalists themselves. Journalism flows from our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms of speech and of the press, the bedrock of democracy. In the United States, this is the sacrosanct First Amendment, and our Constitution copied it, the Philippine Constitution, to declare that no law should be passed to abridge these freedoms. Journalists therefore exercise constitutionally guaranteed freedoms, with some limitations such as libel and considerations of national security, among others, when they report the news. We should be on the same page on this, otherwise it would be hard to agree on many other things about journalism and the need for news literacy. Now, journalism, according to Kovac and Rosenstiel, is the system that societies use to produce or supply the news. Journalism is the system, and news is the product or output. But this is a limited definition because journalism has other outputs like features, opinion, and in multiple formats, not just print or online. What defines journalism? Practitioners and academics are of the consensus that for a type of information to be considered a product of journalism, there has to be verification done by an independent journalist or news organization that is accountable to the public. Take away one or more elements and the ability of the information and its bearer, rather the credibility of the information and its bearer could be put into question. So these characteristics, verification, independence, and accountability, distinguish journalism from other types of information, like advertising, propaganda, entertainment, and raw information. Now, this definition requires some unpacking. Verification is efficiently done in a newsroom setting where there are editors, fact-checkers, and proofreaders to check on the work of a reporter. These are the established media like TV news divisions, newspapers, news websites, and non-profit journalistic organizations. These are organized entities with long track records. Take note, however, that freelance journalists can also produce good journalism. Journalists may also tweet or post news or photos just like regular social media users. So there are varying degrees of verification and therefore reliability. The question is, do we know what the reliable sources of news are? Not everything on social media is a product of journalism or can be considered to be news. Independence separates journalism from advertising, public relations, and propaganda, which are financed by corporations and politicians and others who want to promote themselves or enhance their reputations or damage those of others. State-controlled news outfits are not independent. Extreme examples are China and North Korea. The BBC in the UK and ABC in Australia are publicly funded, but they are free of government control. There are instances, however, when news organizations also lose their independence. For example, publishers or editors could kill a story at the bidding of a big advertiser or a powerful politician. We oftentimes don't know this because these things happen behind the scenes. News organizations may also engage in the publication of paid or sponsored content, usually promoting products or services, and are sometimes called advertorials or branded content. Sometimes they are not labeled as such to mislead readers into thinking that these are products of journalism, but they are most certainly not. We also have to recognize that the news media are also businesses that need to make money. News organizations may also be manipulated or used for PR or propaganda. This is very evident during elections, when many newspapers carry news items promoting a certain candidate, even if there is little or no news value in the story. Accountability is what separates journalism or news from fake news. By now, you must have listened to so many talks about fake news. No? Fake news does exist. Fake news involves a key element, which is deception. So there are websites or social media accounts that mimic news organizations or news content, and we do not know who made them. There are no names or fake names of editors and reporters. Nonetheless, we should not use the term fake news carelessly. News organizations do make mistakes, but do they engage in fake news? In contrast with fake news, legitimate news organizations are accountable to their owners, to their publishers, editors, and reporters. No? Editors and reporters may be identifiable, they may be contacted, and they may be asked to make corrections. No? And because of this, reporters or editors may lose their jobs for making egregious errors. No? The same thing cannot be said of fake news. I mentioned the concept of news value. No? News value is the criteria attributed to the work of scholars Galtung and Rouge in the 1960s that is used to determine newsworthiness. In other words, news value dictates what is news and what is not. The news values are a conceptual framework used within journalism to describe the gatekeeping processes of the mainstream media, according to Galtung in 2014. These include frequency, threshold, unambiguity, meaningfulness, consonance, unexpectedness and continuity, compositional balance, elite nations or regions, elite people, personification and negativity. So whether we like it or not, notorious celebrities are newsworthy. But the news media may be faulted for spending an inordinate amount of airtime or space on a public catfight among celebrities at the expense of more important news, no? And Filipino news organizations have been called out for it by an industry watchdog, which is the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, or CMFR. No? Now, we have to differentiate between news and opinion. This is easily done when news organizations label the two as such, but sometimes they fail to do so. Therefore, we should teach our students, our citizens, to differentiate between news and opinion. News is the routine reporting of events, an assemblage of facts presented in their proper context. So editorials, editorial cartoons, columns, and letters to the editor are opinion. Facebook or Twitter posts may contain opinion. We have different opinions, but we will have a hard time controverting facts. And we are better off taking action on news over opinions, because opinions can be wrong. The next important question that you might have is the role of objectivity in the news. We often hear this, that the news must be objective, that the news must not be biased. The problem is we are all biased because we are all products of our own culture and environment. We have our preferences and prejudices. Kovac and Rosenstiel, authors of the book titled The Elements of Journalism, wrote that objectivity was not originally a core value of journalism. Objectivity refers to the means of containing the news and not the end product. Objectivity means that reporters got the news through objective methods that will allow others, like their editors or even their competitors, to conduct verification. One of our former editors often told us that 100% objectivity is like Mount Everest, a mountain that is difficult to climb. The act of choosing to write one story over the other is already an act of subjectivity. No? So, therefore, we should be more concerned with fairness and objectivity. News stories should be fair to their subjects. Journalists are expected to exert all efforts to get all the sides of the story. A politician, for instance, who is the subject of a corruption accusation, should be allowed to respond, and the response should be included in the story or in a separate story beside the main story. It cannot wait for the next day because that would be unfair. So fairness should be the gold standard. The good thing about a free press is that we can get our news from a variety of sources. A free press means that news organizations compete against each other and check or verify each other's works. In mature democracies, newspapers or news organizations may have certain political leanings and are even classified within the political spectrum, liberal, conservative, or in between, based on the types of stories that they cover or opinions that they highlight. It's a good practice to consume news and opinion from diverse sources, not just one source. A final point that I would like to make is that news deals with the truth. Something is not news if it's not true. Journalism, however, deals not with absolute truths or philosophical truths, but rather practical truths or truth in the meantime. Stony Brook in New York calls it the provisional truth. So as far as news is concerned, truth can change when new facts or information come to light. Even scientific information is subject to the consensus of scientists and therefore subject to change. Karl Popper argued that what makes knowledge scientific is its falsifiability. For instance, Pluto used to be a planet. In 2006, it was demoted to a dwarf planet. Now, a NASA scientist thinks Pluto should again be classified as a planet. Journalism, therefore, according to Carl Bernstein, who became a household name for his original reporting on the Watergate scandal along with Bob Woodward, is the best obtainable version of the truth. To recap, amid information chaos in the world, we should know what constitutes journalism and what doesn't. Journalism requires verification, independence, and accountability, according to Stony Brook of New York. Journalism, however, may be susceptible to the information of media owners, advertisers, and the powers that be. Therefore, beware. Next, journalism is accountable, but fake news is not. Moreover, journalists follow a criteria for newsworthiness, and we call it the news values. Next, the public should be able to tell the difference between news and opinion. I think that is the starting point of news literacy. Next, objectivity is a myth. No? And fairness should be the gold standard. Journalism, as we said, is the best obtainable version of the truth, but journalistic truth can change when new facts or information come to light. Finally, news organizations compete against and check each other. The public is better off consuming news from diverse sources. I would like to end here and thank you for listening to my presentation. Goodbye.